maintenance tunnel beneath NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain complex reeked of ozone and superheated copper. I'd been down here for 3 hours, running diagnostics on the backup communication arrays, when every screen in the facility erupted in blinding white light. Not flickering white, not error code white. Pure, searing white that burned through my closed eyelids and left dancing afterimages floating in my vision like ghosts. Then complete darkness swallowed us whole. Emergency power kicked in exactly 2.3 seconds later. I'd counted, bathing everything in hellish red that made the tunnel look like the inside of a wound. But those seconds of absolute darkness had told me everything I needed to know. In 23 years as a communications engineer, I'd never seen primary and backup systems die simultaneously. The Geiger counter on my belt started clicking. Slow at first, then faster, like an electronic heartbeat picking up speed. I fumbled for my radio, muscle memory, guiding my fingers to the correct frequency. Control, this is Bodhi in Tunnel 7. We've got a complete system failure down here. Primary and backup arrays are. Static exploded from the speaker, not the gentle hiss of distance, but a violent, tooth-rattling shriek that made me rip the earpiece out. The radio's LED display spasmed between frequencies like a dying insect, unable to lock onto any signal. Around me, the tunnel's communication cables hung from their mounting brackets like severed arteries, their protective casings split and hemorrhaging smoke. The Geiger counter's clicking was accelerating. Click, click. Click, click, click. Click, 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 click. I pulled out my tablet to check the radiation readings. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, showing only fragments of data through the broken glass, but what I could see made my saliva turn metallic. Background radiation had spiked to 3 times normal levels and was climbing steadily, each number higher than the last. Something metallic clinked against my boot. I looked down and saw Kora's engagement ring rolling across the concrete floor like a lost coin. The diamond caught the emergency lighting, throwing tiny red reflections against the tunnel walls that looked like droplets of blood. She must have dropped it when she was here yesterday, helping me catalog the equipment. The ring was burning hot in my palm. Too hot. The metal band seared my skin as if it had been sitting in a furnace for hours. But we were 300 feet underground, buried in solid granite. I clipped the ring to my keychain with trembling fingers and headed for the main corridor, my boots echoing off the concrete walls like gunshots. The elevator was dead, another casualty of whatever had hit us. I took the emergency stairs 3 at a time, my breathing echoing in the narrow stairwell like a trapped animal. The main communications center was a scene from hell. Sparks showered from overhead cable trays while technicians ran between workstations with fire extinguishers, their faces lit by the dancing flames. The smell of burning electronics was so thick I could taste it, bitter and sharp, like licking a battery terminal while it was still connected. Bodhi! Someone grabbed my shoulder. It was Jake, the facility security chief, his face streaked with soot. Thank God. We need you up here. Everything's fried. I looked around the room. Every screen was either dead or showing cascading error messages. The massive overhead displays that normally showed global communication networks were black. Even the hardened military equipment, gear designed to survive nuclear war, was failing. What's the status on external communications? I asked. Jake shook his head. Nothing. Landlines, satellites, shortwave radio, it's all gone. We can't reach Washington, NORAD Colorado Springs, or any of the other facilities. I moved to the main console, my fingers flying over controls that should have been familiar. Nothing responded. The keyboards were dead, the monitors blank. It was like trying to perform surgery on a corpse. Sir? A young technician appeared at my elbow. Sarah, I think her name was. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her tablet. I was monitoring the atmospheric sensors when everything went dark. Just before the failure, I caught something on the cosmic ray detectors. She led me to a bank of instruments that somehow still had power. The readings made my blood feel like ice water in my veins. The detectors had registered a massive gamma ray burst, followed by a sustained electromagnetic pulse that had lasted nearly 30 seconds. This signature, I said, studying the data with growing horror. It's not natural. Solar flares don't behave like this. What are you saying? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the readings again, hoping I was wrong, knowing I wasn't. The pulse pattern was too regular, too focused. Natural electromagnetic events were chaotic, unpredictable. This had structure, purpose, intelligence. I'm saying someone detonated a nuclear device in the upper atmosphere, I said. High-altitude electromagnetic pulse. It's designed to knock out electronics over a massive area without causing direct casualties. The room went dead silent except for the hiss of fire suppressors and the distant wail of alarms that no one would answer. How massive? Sarah asked, her voice cracking. I did the math in my head, factoring in the pulse duration and intensity. Each calculation made the picture worse. If they positioned it correctly, they could have taken out the entire North American electrical grid. Maybe more. Jake was already moving toward the hardened communication equipment. We need to contact the Pentagon. They need to know. With what? I interrupted. Everything's dead. Even the equipment that's supposed to survive nuclear war. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl like insects were burrowing under it. The hardened communication gear, the stuff built to military specifications with electromagnetic shielding, was damaged in very specific ways. Burn marks around access panels, scorch marks on cable connections, precise cuts in the shielding that looked almost surgical, as if someone had known exactly which components to target. Jake, I said quietly, when was the last time anyone did a security sweep of this facility? He frowned. Standard sweep was 3 days ago. Why? I pointed to the burn marks with a trembling finger. Because that's not EMP damage. That's sabotage. The implications hit us all at once like a physical blow. The electromagnetic pulse hadn't just knocked out our communications. It had provided cover for someone to physically damage our most protected systems. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had been inside our facility, walking these same corridors, breathing the same air. Someone who might still be here. The Geiger counter on my belt was clicking faster now, a steady rhythm that reminded me of a countdown timer. Radiation levels were still climbing, which meant the nuclear device was still up there, still producing fallout that would eventually drift down to ground level like radioactive snow. I thought about Kora's ring, still burning against my leg through my pocket. She was stationed at the communications relay 30 miles north of here. If the EMP had hit us this hard, what had happened to her facility? What had happened to her? We need to restore communications, I said, my voice hoarse. Not just to contact Washington, but to coordinate with the other facilities. If this was a coordinated attack, we need to know who else got hit. How? Jake asked. Everything's fried. I looked around the room at the dead equipment, the smoking cables, the blank screens that stared back at us like dead eyes. Then I remembered something from my training. Deep in the mountain, there was an old analog system, copper wires and vacuum tubes, technology so primitive it might have survived the pulse. There's a backup system, I said. It's old, but it might still work. The question is, do we have time to get it online before the radiation levels get too high? Jake checked his dosimeter. The numbers made his face go pale. We've got maybe 6 hours before this place becomes uninhabitable. After that, we'll have to evacuate to the deeper bunkers. 6 hours to restore communications to a facility that had just been hit by a nuclear attack. 6 hours to figure out who had sabotaged our equipment and why. 6 hours to find out if Kora was still alive. I looked at the engagement ring clipped to my keychain. The diamond was still throwing red reflections in the emergency lighting, but now they looked exactly like drops of blood. Then we better get started, I said. The clicking of the Geiger counter was getting faster, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear footsteps echoing through the corridors. Footsteps that didn't belong to any of us. The footsteps were getting closer. I pressed my back against the doorframe of the communications center, straining to hear over the hiss of fire suppressors and the relentless clicking of my Geiger counter. The sounds were coming from the main corridor, deliberate, measured steps that didn't match the panicked running of our technicians. Someone was moving through the facility with purpose, someone who knew exactly where they were going. Jake, I whispered, grabbing his arm. Kill the lights. He didn't question me. The emergency lighting died, plunging us into absolute darkness except for the ghostly glow of a few battery-powered instruments. In the sudden quiet, we could all hear them clearly now. At least 3 sets of footsteps, maybe more, moving in formation through the corridors like a military patrol. But we were supposed to be the only military personnel in this section. Sarah's breathing was getting shallow beside me. I could smell her fierce sweat mixing with the acrid smoke from the damaged equipment. Who? She started to whisper. I clamped my hand over her mouth, feeling her terrified breath against my palm. The footsteps had stopped directly outside our door. A voice spoke in what sounded like Russian, low and urgent. Another voice responded, closer to the doorway. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They were coordinating, checking in, making sure their operation was proceeding as planned. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't just sabotage. This was an act of infiltration. The footsteps resumed, moving away from our position toward the secure elevator banks. I waited until the sounds faded before risking a whisper. "We need to get to the old communication system. Now." Jake nodded in the darkness. "Level 7. But that's where." "Where what?" "Where the security breach happened 6 months ago. Someone hacked into our personnel files. We never figured out how they got past the air gap isolation." The pieces were falling into place like dominoes, each revelation worse than the last. The security breach hadn't been random. It had been reconnaissance. Someone had been mapping our facility, learning our procedures, identifying our most vulnerable systems. The electromagnetic pulse had been perfectly timed to provide cover for a physical assault on our remaining defenses. "How many people have access to level 7? I asked. "Skeleton crew. Maybe a dozen personnel with the right clearance." Jake's voice was grim. "But after the breach, we restricted access to essential personnel only." I thought about the precise damage to our hardened equipment, the surgical cuts in the electromagnetic shielding. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems had been inside this facility, walking these corridors, learning our weaknesses. Someone who might still be here. "We need to assume the facility is compromised," I said. "Move fast, stay quiet, and trust no one you don't recognize." The three of us made our way through the darkened corridors, using the dim glow of our flashlights. Every shadow looked like a potential threat. Every sound made us freeze and listen. The facility felt different now. Hostile, alien, like a place that had been invaded by something that didn't belong. The Geiger counter on my belt was maintaining its steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that reminded me with each click that radiation levels were still climbing. We had maybe 5 hours before the facility became uninhabitable, and that was assuming the levels didn't spike suddenly. Level 7 was accessed through a maintenance shaft that dropped straight down into the mountain's core. The ladder rungs were slick with condensation, and the air got noticeably cooler as we descended. Our footsteps echoed in the shaft like we were climbing down into a grave. "Bodhi!" The voice came from below us, drifting up through the darkness like a ghost. I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. "Kora?" I called softly. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours." I dropped the last 10 feet and landed hard on the concrete floor. My sister was crouched beside a bank of ancient equipment, her face lit by the amber glow of vacuum tubes that cast dancing shadows across her features. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with soot and what looked like dried blood from a cut above her left eyebrow. "How did you get here?" I asked, pulling her into a fierce hug. She was shaking, her body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "The relay station got hit worse than you did," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Direct strike on the main antenna array. The whole facility was evacuated, but I stayed behind to try to salvage the equipment." She led me to the ancient communication system, a relic from the 1960s that used copper wire and vacuum tube technology. Primitive by modern standards, but primitive enough that it might have survived the electromagnetic pulse. "I've been trying to establish contact with other facilities," Kora said, her fingers flying over controls that looked like they belonged in a museum. "I've reached 3 stations so far: Colorado Springs, Peterson Air Force Base, and Mountain Home." "What's their status?" Her face went pale. "All hit. All evacuated. We're talking about a coordinated attack on the entire North American defense network." Jake appeared at my shoulder, his face grim. "Any word from Washington?" Kora shook her head. "Dead air. Either their equipment is completely fried or—" She didn't need to finish. We all knew what the alternative was. I moved to the equipment bank, studying the signal analysis displays. The wave patterns scrolled across the screens like electronic heartbeats, but they were erratic, chaotic. Too much interference, too many dead zones where there should have been steady communication traffic. "This isn't just an EMP attack," I said, my finger tracing the jagged interference lines. "Someone's actively jamming frequencies, blocking our attempts to re-establish communications." "From where?" Jake asked. I traced the interference patterns on the display, triangulating the source using the signal strength readings from 3 different monitoring stations. The calculations made my stomach drop like I'd stepped into an elevator shaft. "Close. Maybe 20 miles north." "Right where?" "Right where my station is," Kora finished, her face going white as the implications hit her. "Bodhi, when I evacuated, I saw vehicles moving toward the facility. Military trucks, but not ours. They had some kind of mobile antenna array, and they were setting up equipment on the ridge overlooking our main transmission tower. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The relay station wasn't just damaged, it was occupied. Someone had taken control of one of our most important communication nodes and was using it to coordinate an attack on the entire defense network. "We need to contact the Pentagon," I said. "Warn them about." A new sound cut through the air, the whine of electric motors echoing through the ventilation system. Someone was using the elevator. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "The elevators are dead." "Not all of them," Kora said, her voice tight with fear. "There's an independent system for the secure levels. Battery-powered, hardened against electromagnetic interference." The motor sounds were getting closer, coming from the direction of the main shaft. Someone was descending into the facility's most secure levels that only a handful of people had access to. "How many people know about this location?" I asked. Jake was already moving toward the emergency lockdown controls. "Maybe 6, all with security clearances above top secret." I looked at the ancient communication equipment, at the signal patterns that showed active jamming, at my sister's blood-stained uniform and terrified face. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was worse than I'd imagined. "Jake," I said quietly, "when was the last time you verified the security clearances for Level 7 access?" He froze, his hand halfway to the lockdown switch. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that whoever's been feeding information to the attackers has access to this facility. High-level access. And they know we're down here." The elevator motor sound stopped with a mechanical clunk that echoed through the facility like a gunshot. In the sudden silence, we could hear the soft hiss of pneumatic doors opening somewhere above us, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on metal flooring. Then footsteps. Multiple sets, moving with military precision through the upper levels of the facility, their rhythm too organized to be our scattered technicians. "They're coming," Kora whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient hum of the equipment. I looked at the communication displays, at the wave patterns that showed the attack was still spreading like a virus through the network, still coordinating strikes on facilities across the continent. Somewhere out there, other installations were falling dark one by one, their emergency signals cutting off mid-transmission. The entire North American defense network was being systematically dismantled, and we were the only ones who knew it was happening in real time. "We need to get a message out," I said. "Whatever it takes." Jake shook his head. "If they have someone inside, they'll know what we're doing. They'll stop us." I thought about the engagement ring in my pocket, about Kora's blood-stained uniform, about the clicking Geiger counter that reminded me with each tick that time was running out. The radiation levels were climbing, the attackers were closing in, and somewhere above us, people were counting on us to restore the communications that could save them. "Then we make them choose," I said. "We split up, create multiple transmission attempts from different locations, force them to reveal themselves." "That's suicide," Jake said. I looked at the ancient equipment, at the vacuum tubes glowing like dying stars in the darkness. "Maybe, but it's the only chance we have." The footsteps were getting closer, echoing through the facility like a countdown timer. In the distance, I could hear voices, not panicked like our technicians, but calm, professional, coordinated. The voices of people who were exactly where they wanted to be. The Geiger counter on my belt was clicking faster now, its rhythm matching the accelerated beating of my heart. Radiation levels were approaching the point where extended exposure would cause permanent damage. We had maybe 4 hours before the facility became uninhabitable. 4 hours to stop an attack that had been planned for months, executed by people who knew our every weakness, coordinated by someone who had been walking these corridors, breathing this air, earning our trust while preparing to destroy everything we were sworn to protect. "Kora," I said, "can you establish a link to the secondary transmission array?" She nodded, her fingers already moving over the controls. "Give me 5 minutes. Jake, I need you to create a distraction, something to draw them away from this level." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What kind of distraction?" I smiled grimly. "The kind that makes them think we're trying to evacuate. Set off the emergency alarms on level 3. Make them believe we're running for the surface." The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them clearly now, measured, professional, coming from multiple directions. They were coordinating, surrounding us, cutting off our escape routes. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed we were trying to escape. When I give the signal, I said, we're going deeper into the mountain. There's another communication node on level 9. Older, more primitive, but it might be below their radar. Level 9 was sealed after the radiation leak, Jake said. The background levels down there are already dangerous. I looked at the Geiger counter, at the numbers that were climbing steadily toward the red zone. Then we'll fit right in. The footsteps stopped outside our door. In the silence, I could hear the soft sound of someone breathing, someone listening, someone preparing to make their move. I grabbed Kora's hand and felt her squeeze back, her fingers intertwining with mine like they had when we were children and afraid of the dark. But this darkness was different. This darkness had eyes, and it was watching us. Now, I whispered. The emergency alarms began to wail. The alarms died as suddenly as they'd started, leaving us in a silence that felt like holding our breath underwater. Through the reinforced walls of level 7, we could hear the sounds of pursuit moving away. Boots on metal stairs, voices calling out coordinates in crisp English, the distant slam of blast doors being thrown open and searched. They took the bait, Jake whispered, but his voice carried no relief. We all knew the respite was temporary. I helped Kora finish the connection to the secondary array, my hands shaking as I twisted the copper leads together. The ancient equipment hummed to life with the distinctive whine of vacuum tubes warming up, casting amber shadows across our faces like candlelight in a cathedral. Signal's weak but stable, Kora said, adjusting the frequency modulation. I'm picking up scattered transmissions from, wait. Her face went pale as she pressed the headphones tighter against her ears. Bodhi, listen to this. She handed me the headphones. Through the static, I could hear a woman's voice, calm and professional, speaking in what sounded like a mission report. Primary objectives achieved at 1400 hours. Communication nodes Alpha through Delta are offline. Estimated restoration time 48 to 72 hours. Initiating Phase 2 protocols. The voice was American. Midwest accent, no hesitation. Someone who spoke like she'd been giving military briefings her entire career. There's more, Kora said, her finger hovering over the frequency dial. Multiple channels, all coordinated. They're using our own communication protocols. I listened to 3 more transmissions, each one a knife twist in my chest. American voices, professional terminology, detailed knowledge of our facilities and procedures. This wasn't just infiltration, this was betrayal from within. How long have they been planning this? I asked. Long enough to place assets at every major facility, Jake said, his voice hollow. The security breach 6 months ago wasn't just reconnaissance. It was recruitment. I was about to respond when footsteps echoed from the direction of the emergency stairwell, different from before. Slower, more cautious. Someone was coming back, and they weren't in a hurry anymore. Kill the equipment, I whispered. Make it look like we were never here. We powered down the transmitter and crouched behind a bank of servers, listening to the footsteps grow closer. The sound stopped just outside our door, followed by the soft scratch of metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock with professional precision. The door opened with a barely audible creak. A figure stepped into the darkened room, silhouetted against the dim emergency lighting from the corridor. Female, medium height, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged here. You can come out, the voice said. I know you're in here. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Professional, calm, with just a hint of exhaustion. Not threatening, exactly, but not friendly either. I'm not armed, the voice continued, and I'm not here to hurt you. Something in the tone made me stand up, my hands raised where she could see them. Jake started to protest, but I shook my head. Sometimes the only way through was forward. The figure stepped into the room, and I saw her face in the amber glow of the equipment. My blood turned to ice. It was Ember Hayes, the NSA contractor who'd been working with our facility for the past 8 months. The same woman who'd helped design our new security protocols after the breach. The same woman who'd had unrestricted access to our most sensitive systems. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, her usually perfect hair disheveled. There was a fresh cut on her left cheek, and her breathing was labored like she'd been running. More importantly, she was alone, no backup, no weapons visible. Hello, Bodhi, she said, her voice carrying a weight of exhaustion and something else, guilt, maybe, or regret. We need to talk. You're part of this, I said, my voice barely controlled. You're the one who. I'm the one who helped them map your systems, yes. Her admission hit like a physical blow. I'm also the one who's been trying to stop them for the past 6 hours. Jake stepped out from behind the servers, his sidearm drawn. Bullshit. You're one of them. Ember didn't flinch. If I were still one of them, you'd already be dead. The team that was just here, they're not looking for you anymore. They're looking for me. Why should we believe you? Kora asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Ember reached into her jacket, slowly, carefully, and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. Because I have this. Complete schematics of the attack, target lists, operational timelines. Everything you need to stop them. She set the device on the table between us. The electromagnetic pulse was just the opening move. They've been placing shaped charges at key infrastructure points for months. Power grids, communication hubs, fuel depots. In 18 hours, they're going to detonate everything simultaneously, creating a cascading failure. I said, the implications hitting me like an avalanche. Total infrastructure collapse. Exactly. And while everyone's focused on the immediate crisis, they'll be moving on the secondary targets. Government facilities, military bases, anything that could organize a response. Jake kept his weapon trained on her. What's your angle? Why turn against them now? Ember's face hardened. Because I didn't sign up for mass casualties. I thought we were targeting military installations, disrupting communication networks. Clean surgical strikes. But the secondary phase. She shook her head. They're planning to hit civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, water treatment plants, emergency services. Millions of people will die. So you grew a conscience, I said. Convenient timing. No, she said, meeting my eyes. I grew a brain. I realized they were never planning to let any of us live. Everyone who knows about the operation, including me, is expendable. The team that was just here, they had orders to eliminate all witnesses. Kora leaned forward. What do you want from us? I want to stop this, but I can't do it alone. The charges are hardened against electromagnetic interference. They have to be disarmed manually. And the only way to access them is through the facility's own security systems. Systems you helped design, Jake said. Systems I helped design, she admitted, which means I know their weaknesses. I looked at the device she'd placed on the table. What's the catch? The catch is that we have less than 18 hours to reach 17 different locations across 3 states. And every minute we delay, more people die. Why 17 locations? I asked. Because that's the minimum number needed to create a cascading failure. Take out those 17 points, and the entire eastern seaboard goes dark. No power, no communications, no emergency services. Complete infrastructure collapse. I thought about the radiation levels, about the limited time we had before the facility became uninhabitable. We can't reach 17 locations in 18 hours. Not from here. No, Ember said. But we can reach the control node. The facility where they're coordinating the attack. Take that out, and the automated systems can't execute the secondary phase. Where? 20 miles north. The relay station your sister was evacuated from. Kora's face went white. That's where I saw the vehicles. The mobile antenna array. It's perfect cover, Ember said. Hidden in plain sight, protected by the facility's own security systems. And it's hardened against the same electromagnetic interference that's keeping us from calling for help. Jake lowered his weapon slightly. How do we know this isn't a trap? You don't, Ember said. But ask yourself this, if I wanted to trap you, why would I come alone? Why would I give you information that could expose the entire operation? I looked at the device on the table, at the schematics and target lists that could save millions of lives. Because you're scared. You know they're going to kill you whether this succeeds or fails. That's right, she said. I'm scared. Scared of what I helped create, scared of what happens if we don't stop it, and scared of what happens if we do. What do you mean? I mean that even if we succeed, even if we stop the attack, there are going to be questions. Investigations, trials, and everyone who was involved, including me, is going to pay the price. I understood then. She wasn't just offering to help us, she was offering to sacrifice herself. To accept the consequences of her actions in exchange for the chance to prevent a catastrophe. The relay station, I said. How many people are there? 12-person team. All professionals, all armed, all expecting me to report back within the hour. When I don't, they're going to assume I've been compromised. Which means they'll accelerate the timeline, Kora said. Exactly. Instead of 18 hours, we might have 12. Maybe less. I looked at my sister, at Jake, at the woman who'd helped design our destruction and was now offering to help prevent it. The Geiger counter on my belt was clicking steadily, reminding me that time was running out in more ways than one. What's the plan? I asked. Ember smiled grimly. The plan is simple. We go to the relay station, we disable the control node, and we try not to die in the process. And if we do die, then we hope someone else figures out what we were trying to do and finishes the job. I picked up the device, feeling its weight in my hands. Such a small thing to carry the fate of millions. How do we get there? The facility's vehicles are all dead. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the old mining road. It's not on any official maps, but it's still passable. 20 miles through the mountains, most of it uphill. On foot, with radiation levels climbing and a 12-person kill team looking for us. Jake shook his head. This is insane. Yes, Ember said. It is, but it's also the only chance we have. I looked at the communication equipment, at the ancient technology that had survived the electromagnetic pulse. Can we establish contact with other facilities? Warn them about the secondary phase? Not without compromising our position. The moment we transmit, they'll triangulate our location. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before they're on top of us. 10 minutes, I repeated. Enough time to send a warning? Enough time to send a warning. Not enough time to coordinate a response. I thought about the implications. Even if we warned other facilities, even if we told them about the shaped charges and the cascading failure, most of them were already operating with skeleton crews. They didn't have the resources to investigate 17 different locations across 3 states. We're on our own, I said. We're on our own, Ember confirmed. I looked at Kora, at the determination in her eyes despite the fear. You don't have to do this. You can stay here, try to re-establish communications, coordinate with whatever facilities are still online. No, she said. I'm coming with you. The radiation levels are going to kill us anyway if we don't stop this. At least this way we go down fighting. I felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. This was my sister, the woman who'd chosen to serve her country, even when it meant walking into danger. Now she was choosing to walk into something far worse. Jake! He holstered his weapon. Someone has to keep you idiots alive. I looked at Ember, at the woman who'd helped create this nightmare and was now offering to help end it. Any other surprises we should know about? Just one, she said. The control node isn't just coordinating the attack. It's also monitoring all our communications. Every transmission, every phone call, every digital signal. They know where the other facilities are, they know who's still alive, and they know who's trying to organize a response. Which means that even if we succeed, even if we stop the attack, they're going to know exactly who did it. And they're going to be very, very angry. I understood. This wasn't just a mission, it was a suicide mission. We were walking into the teeth of a carefully planned operation, outnumbered and outgunned, with no backup and no hope of rescue. Any regrets? I asked. Ember looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Only that I didn't do this sooner. The Geiger counter on my belt clicked faster as we prepared to leave the relative safety of the facility. Outside, the radiation levels were climbing, the attackers were waiting, and somewhere in the distance, shaped charges were counting down to a catastrophe that would reshape the continent. But for the first time since the electromagnetic pulse had hit, I felt something like hope. Not hope for success, the odds were too long for that. Hope for redemption, maybe. Hope for the chance to make things right. Hope for the chance to die fighting instead of hiding in a bunker while the world burned. Let's go, I said. The 4 of us moved toward the maintenance tunnel, toward the mountains, toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of millions. Behind us, the facility's emergency lighting flickered and died, leaving only the amber glow of vacuum tubes and the steady, relentless clicking of the Geiger counter marking time. The maintenance tunnel stretched ahead of us like a throat waiting to swallow. Emergency lighting cast sickly yellow pools every 50 feet, leaving vast stretches of darkness between. Our footsteps echoed off concrete walls that wept condensation, each drop hitting the floor with the rhythm of a broken metronome. I checked my watch. 0247 hours. 7 hours since the pulse hit. 11 hours until the secondary phase triggered. My hands trembled as I read the display, not from fear, but from the first subtle effects of radiation poisoning. The Geiger counter on my belt had been clicking steadily for the past mile, but now it began to accelerate. Click, click, click. Click, 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 click. The sound made my teeth ache. Radiation spiking, I said, stopping to check the display. The numbers glowed in angry red. 850 Roentgens per hour. Fatal dose territory. Ember looked back from point position, her face pale in the emergency lighting. We're passing under the auxiliary cooling system. There's a leak. How big a leak? Jake asked, his voice tight. Big enough that we need to move. Fast. We picked up the pace, but the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The clicking grew faster, a mechanical heartbeat racing toward cardiac arrest. 1,200 Roentgens. 1,400. 1,600. Kora stumbled, caught herself against the wall. Blood vessels in her eyes had burst, leaving red streaks across the whites. I can taste copper, she said, wiping blood from her nose. That's the radiation, Ember said. Everyone's going to start feeling it soon. Nausea, dizziness, metallic taste. The question is whether we can reach the relay station before it gets bad enough to incapacitate us. I thought about the physics of it, the invisible death soaking through our bodies with each step. At these levels, we had maybe 6 hours before the symptoms became debilitating. Maybe 8 before they became fatal. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were dying from the same technology we were trying to save. How much farther? I asked. 12 miles. Maybe 13. I did the math in my head. At our current pace, carrying full equipment packs, we'd need at least 4 hours to reach the relay station. That left us a narrow window, assuming the radiation levels didn't get worse. The tunnel began to slope upward, following the natural contours of the mountain. The air grew thinner, our breathing more labored. Behind us, the facility's emergency lighting flickered and died, leaving only the pale glow of our headlamps to push back the darkness. Contact, Jake whispered suddenly, raising his hand. We froze. Ahead, barely visible in the yellow wash of emergency lighting, shapes moved across the tunnel. 3 figures in hazmat suits, carrying equipment that looked like scanning devices. They're tracking us, Ember said, following our radiation signature. Can we go around them? Not without backtracking 5 miles. And we don't have time for that. I watched the figures methodically sweep the tunnel ahead. Professional, coordinated, efficient. They'd found our trail and were following it with the patience of bloodhounds. Weapons? I asked. Jake checked his sidearm. 12 rounds. You. Emergency kit. Flare gun, basic tools. I looked at Ember. You. Knowledge of their standard operating procedures. And a really bad feeling about this. The figures were getting closer. I could see their faces now through the clear faceplates of their hazmat suits. Hard features, focused expressions, the kind of people who'd been doing this long enough to make it look routine. They're not here to capture us, Ember said quietly. They're here to clean up loose ends. You sure about that? I'm sure. No communication equipment, no restraints, no prisoner transport gear. Just weapons and body bags. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How many others know about the secondary phase? Besides us? Maybe a dozen people worldwide. And they're systematically eliminating every single one. The lead figure raised his scanning device, sweeping it slowly across the tunnel walls. The device emitted a soft electronic whine, the sound of sophisticated equipment doing what it was designed to do. They're using radiation detection to track us, I said. But that works both ways. What do you mean? I checked my Geiger counter again. The reading was off the charts, over 2,000 Roentgens per hour. The leak from the cooling system. It's not just affecting us. It's affecting everything in this tunnel. Including their equipment, Kora said, understanding immediately. Including their equipment. High radiation levels interfere with electronics. Makes readings unreliable, causes false positives. I pulled the emergency flare from my pack. Jake, when I say go, put 3-round center mass on the lead figure. Kora, kill the lights. Everyone else, move fast and don't look back. What about you? I'm gonna give them something bigger to worry about. The figures were 50 feet away now, close enough that I could see the make and model of their scanning equipment. Professional grade, military specification, designed to work in high radiation environments. But not designed to work in the kind of radiation environment I was about to create. I pulled the pin on the flare and held it ready. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Jake's pistol barked 3 times, the muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. The lead figure spun and dropped, his scanning device clattering across the concrete floor. The other 2 figures raised their weapons, but I was already moving. I threw the flare as hard as I could, sending it spinning through the air like a miniature comet. It struck the tunnel wall 20 feet behind the remaining figures and exploded in a shower of brilliant red sparks. The chemical reaction was immediate and violent. Magnesium burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to vaporize the radioactive condensation on the tunnel walls. The resulting cloud of superheated, radioactive steam billowed through the tunnel like the breath of a dragon. The figure's radiation detectors went insane, their electronic whines rising to a shriek as they tried to process readings that exceeded their design parameters. Emergency alarms began to sound from their equipment, adding to the chaos. "Move!" I shouted. We ran past the figures, who were struggling with equipment that had suddenly become worse than useless. Their scanners were giving them readings that suggested they were standing in the heart of a nuclear reactor, while their communications equipment was being overwhelmed by electronic interference from the ionized air. One of them managed to get a shot off, the muzzle flash illuminating a face twisted with rage and fear. The bullet went wide, sparking off the tunnel wall and ricocheting into the darkness. Then we were past them, racing through the darkness while the radioactive clouds spread behind us like a curtain. "That was insane," Jake said, his breathing labored. "That was brilliant," Kora corrected. "But it's not going to stop them for long." She was right. The cloud would dissipate within minutes, and then they'd be back on our trail. But we'd bought ourselves some time, and in our current situation, time was more valuable than ammunition. The tunnel began to level out, and I could see pale light ahead, not the sickly yellow of emergency lighting, but the gray wash of dawn filtering down from the surface. We were approaching the exit. "Hold up," Ember said. "We need to talk about what we're walking into." We stopped 50 feet from the exit, huddled in the last pool of emergency lighting. The Geiger counter was still clicking, but the rate had slowed slightly. We were moving away from the worst of the contamination. "The relay station," Ember said. "It's not just a communication facility. It's a hardened military installation, built to survive nuclear attack. Reinforced concrete, blast doors, independent power supply. And it's staffed by people who've been planning this operation for months." "How many people?" 12 on the primary team. Plus support staff, security personnel, technical specialists. Maybe 25 total. Against 4 of us. Against 4 of us. And they have home field advantage. I thought about the odds. 25 against 4. Professional soldiers against 1 engineer, 1 communications specialist, 1 security officer, and 1 defector whose loyalties were still questionable. "What's the facility's weak point?" I asked. "The power supply. It's independent, but it's also isolated. Take out the generators, and the whole facility goes dark. No communications, no climate control, no security systems." "Where are the generators?" "External building, 50 meters from the main facility. Concrete block construction, steel doors, basic security. Guards? 2, maybe 3. But they're not expecting an attack. Why would they be? As far as they know, we're all dead." Jake checked his ammunition again. 12 rounds won't be enough. "We're not going to fight them head on," I said. "We're going to be smarter than that." "How?" I thought about the facility's layout, about the way military installations were designed. Standard protocols, predictable responses, systems that could be turned against themselves if you knew how to do it. "The power supply," I said. "When the generators go down, they'll switch to emergency backup. But emergency backup only lasts 6 hours, and it only powers essential systems. Which means they'll have to choose between communications and security. They can't power both." Ember nodded slowly. "And if they choose communications, they lose their security systems. Blast doors, surveillance cameras, automated defenses. Everything goes dark. And if they choose security, they lose their ability to coordinate the attack. No communications with the other cells, no control over the secondary phase." Kora smiled grimly. "Either way, we win. Either way, we get a chance to win," I corrected. "There's still the matter of getting inside the facility and disabling the control node." "One step at a time," Ember said. "First, we take out the generators. Then we improvise." We reached the tunnel exit as the first light of dawn began to filter through the heavy clouds. The radiation levels were lower here, but still dangerous. The Geiger counter clicked steadily, a constant reminder that we were operating on borrowed time. The relay station sat on a ridge 2 miles away, a cluster of low buildings surrounded by antenna arrays and communication dishes. It looked peaceful in the morning light, almost serene. Only the absence of normal activity, no vehicles moving, no personnel visible, hinted at the deadly purpose it served. "There," Ember said, pointing to a small concrete building separated from the main facility. "Generator building. 2 guards, predictable patrol pattern." I watched the building through my binoculars. Sure enough, two figures in military fatigues were walking a slow circuit around the perimeter. Professional, alert, but not expecting trouble. "What's the power capacity?" I asked. "Enough to run the entire facility for 72 hours. But if we can damage the control systems, we can force them to choose between communications and security," I finished. "How do we get close enough?" "There's a maintenance road that runs along the ridge. It's not guarded, but it's visible from the main facility. So we go at night? We don't have that long. The secondary phase triggers in." I checked my watch. 10 hours. By the time night falls, it'll be too late. "Daylight assault then," Jake said. "Against a hardened military facility with 25 personnel. Against a facility whose personnel think they're safe," I corrected. "They're not expecting an attack. They're expecting a report from the team that's been hunting us." I thought about the men in the tunnel, about the chaos we'd left behind. By now, they'd either regained contact with the relay station or they'd failed to report in. Either way, the people at the facility would be starting to worry. "They'll be on high alert," Ember said, reading my thoughts. "But they'll also be focused on the perimeter. They won't be expecting an attack on the power supply. Because taking out the generators doesn't stop the attack," I said. "It just delays it." "Right. The shaped charges are on independent timers. Even if we shut down the control node, the secondary phase will still trigger. Just without coordination." I thought about the implications. 17 locations across 3 states. If the charges detonated without coordination, the damage would be random, chaotic. Some targets would be hit, others missed. The infrastructure would be damaged, but not destroyed. "It's not about stopping the attack," I said. "It's about disrupting it, making it ineffective." "Exactly. And buying time for other facilities to organize a response." Assuming there are other facilities left, we began moving toward the relay station, using the terrain to mask our approach. The Geiger counter continued its steady clicking, reminding us that we were racing against more than just the clock. As we got closer, I could see the facility in detail. The main building was a low concrete structure designed to withstand attack. The antenna arrays were protected by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. The generator building sat apart from the main complex, its isolation making it vulnerable. 2 guards, Jake observed, walking predictable patterns, 20-minute intervals. "Windows?" I asked. "No windows. 1 door, steel construction, electronic lock." "Security cameras?" 3 visible. Overlapping fields of fire, but there's a blind spot on the north side. I studied the approach. 50 meters of open ground, covered by surveillance cameras and periodic guard patrols. It would take perfect timing and a lot of luck. "When's the next patrol?" I asked. Jake checked his watch. 14 minutes. "That gives us a window, but only one chance." I looked at my companions, at the determination in their faces despite the fear. We all knew the odds. We all knew what failure meant. "Everyone ready?" I asked. "Ready," Kora said. "Ready," Jake said. "Ready," Ember said. I checked the Geiger counter one last time. The radiation levels were climbing again as we approached the facility. We had maybe 4 hours before the effects became debilitating. 4 hours to save the world. I took a deep breath, tasting copper and fear in equal measure. "Let's go." We moved toward the generator building, toward the heart of the conspiracy, toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of millions. Behind us, the tunnel exhaled a plume of radioactive steam, and somewhere in the distance, shaped charges counted down to catastrophe. The clicking of the Geiger counter marked time like a death watch, steady and relentless, measuring the seconds until everything changed forever. The generator building's steel door hung twisted on its hinges, acrid smoke pouring from the ruptured fuel lines within. Our improvised explosives had worked. The diesel generators were scrap metal now, their twisted remains sparking in the darkness. But across the compound, the main facility's emergency lighting flickered to life like malevolent stars. "Backup powers engaged," Ember said, wiping soot from her face. Blood from her nose had dried in dark streaks. The radiation sickness was accelerating. "They've got 6 hours of battery life, maybe 8 if they're conservative with the load." Through my binoculars, I watched figures move behind the reinforced windows of the main building. 25 people making a choice that would determine the fate of millions. The blast doors remained sealed, their mechanical locks engaged, but the antenna arrays were already rotating back to active positions. They chose to maintain the secondary phase, I said, tasting copper as I spoke. They're sacrificing facility security to keep the attack coordinated. Kora wiped blood from her nose. The radiation sickness was getting worse. How long until the charges detonate? I checked my watch. The numbers blurred for a moment before coming into focus. 4 hours, 37 minutes. And how long to reach the control node? If we can get through the blast doors, 20 minutes to the server room. Jake laughed bitterly. If we can get through blast doors designed to survive nuclear attack. With what? Harsh language and good intentions. I studied the facility layout, thinking about the security systems that would be offline, the emergency protocols that would be running. Ember, when they switch to backup power, what systems get priority? Life support, communications, basic security. Everything else goes dark, including the automatic door locks. She paused, understanding dawning in her eyes. The blast doors default to mechanical locks during power failures, but you'd need the override codes, which you have, which I had 6 months ago. They rotate the codes every 90 days. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. So we're locked out? Not necessarily. Ember pulled a small device from her pack, a military-grade electronic lock pick. I can bypass the mechanical locks, but I need someone to hold the door systems while I work. And I need about 10 minutes. 10 minutes while they're calling for backup, Jake said. While they're organizing a response to our little power outage. 10 minutes while we're all dying of radiation poisoning, Kora added quietly. I looked at my sister, saw the broken blood vessels in her eyes, the pallor of her skin. We'd all been exposed to lethal doses, but Kora had taken the worst of it during our escape from the tunnel. She had maybe 6 hours before the cellular damage became irreversible. There's another way, I said slowly. The maintenance shaft system. It connects to the main building through the climate control ducts. That's suicide, Ember said. Those shafts were designed for routine maintenance, not human passage. They're barely 18 inches in diameter. But they bypass the blast doors, and they're not monitored by security cameras. Because no one's supposed to be able to fit through them. I thought about the physics of it, about the human body's ability to compress and contort. It would be like being buried alive, crawling through a metal coffin with no guarantee of reaching the other side. I can fit, I said. I'm the smallest of us. Bodhi, no. Kora grabbed my arm. Those shafts are contaminated with radioactive dust from the cooling system leak. The exposure levels would be off the charts. Everything's contaminated now, and someone has to reach the control node. Then we all go together. We find another way. I looked at my companions, at the determination in their faces despite the fear. We all knew the odds. We all knew what failure meant. But I also knew what the radiation readings meant, what the symptoms we were all showing meant. Listen to me, I said. We've all been exposed to fatal doses. Even if we succeed, even if we stop the secondary phase, we're not walking away from this. The question is whether we can stay functional long enough to complete the mission. The answer is no, Ember said bluntly. At current exposure levels, we have maybe 4 hours before the nausea and dizziness become incapacitating. Maybe 6 before we lose motor control entirely. Then we need to split up, maximize our chances. How? I pointed to the facility diagram Ember had sketched in the dirt. Jake and Ember go through the blast doors. Use the override codes, take your time, do it right. Kora and I go through the maintenance shafts. If one approach fails, the other might succeed. And if both approaches fail, then we improvise. But we don't give up. Jake checked his ammunition for the 100th time. What about the personnel inside? 25 trained operators who know we're coming. They're not expecting an attack from inside their own facility. They're expecting a perimeter assault. They're not expecting us to be suicidal enough to crawl through contaminated air ducts, Kora said. Exactly. I looked at the facility one more time, memorizing the layout, the approaches, the potential points of failure. In 4 hours, 17 different locations would be hit simultaneously. Power grids, communication hubs, transportation nodes, everything that held the country's infrastructure together. Unless we could reach the control node and disrupt the coordination. Everyone ready? I asked. Ready, they said in unison. We moved toward the facility, splitting into 2 teams as we reached the perimeter fence. Jake and Ember headed for the main entrance, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Kora and I circled around to the maintenance access point on the north side. The access hatch was a simple steel cover set into the ground, marked with radiation warnings and hazardous material symbols. I pulled it open, revealing a narrow shaft that dropped into darkness. "Geiger counter," I said. Kora held the device over the opening. The clicking accelerated immediately, rising to a rapid staccato that made my teeth ache. 2,000 roentgens per hour. Maybe more. How long can we survive that? Maybe 30 minutes before we lose consciousness. Maybe an hour before it becomes unsurvivable. I thought about the layout of the maintenance system, about the distance we'd need to travel through contaminated metal tunnels. It's 20 minutes to the server room. If we move fast, if we can move at all once we're inside those ducts. I looked at my sister, saw the fear in her eyes mixed with determination. "Kora, you don't have to do this. You can wait here, coordinate with Jake and Ember." "No." Her voice was firm. "We started this together. We finish it together." I nodded, understanding. "Radios? Dead. The EMP effects are still interfering with short-range communications. So once we're inside, we're on our own. We've been on our own since this started." I dropped into the shaft, feeling the metal walls close around me like a coffin. The space was barely wide enough for my shoulders, forcing me to move in a low crawl. The Geiger counter on my belt clicked frantically, its sound amplified and distorted by the metal walls. Kora followed, her breathing labored in the confined space. "Which way?" I consulted the facility diagram, trying to orient myself in the darkness. "East tunnel first, then north toward the server room. About 400 meters total. 400 meters through a radioactive maze. 400 meters to save the world." We began crawling through the maintenance shaft, our movements awkward and painful in the confined space. The metal walls were slick with condensation, and every few feet we encountered obstacles, pipe junctions, electrical conduits, ventilation grills that had to be carefully navigated. The radiation levels were even worse than I had expected. The Geiger counter's clicking had accelerated to a continuous buzz, like an angry insect trapped in a metal box. I could taste copper in my mouth, feel the first symptoms of acute radiation syndrome beginning to manifest. "Bodhi," Kora's voice was strained. "I'm getting dizzy. Hold on. We're almost to the first junction." But we weren't almost there. We were maybe a quarter of the way through the shaft system, and already the radiation was taking its toll. I could feel my motor control beginning to deteriorate, my hands shaking as I pulled myself forward. "Talk to me," I said. "Keep me focused. Remember when we were kids? When you tried to convince me that the basement was haunted? I remember you being too smart to believe me. I believed you. I just didn't want to admit it." I smiled in the darkness, remembering. "You were always the practical one. The one who checked the math, verified the results. And you were always the one who saw possibilities where others saw problems. Like now. Like now." We reached the first junction, a wider space where 3 shafts intersected. The relief of being able to move freely was overwhelming, even though the radiation levels were even higher here. The Geiger counter's buzz had become a continuous shriek. "North tunnel," I said, checking my compass. 200 meters to the server room. "Can you make it?" I tried to assess my condition objectively. Nausea was building in my stomach, and my vision was starting to blur around the edges. The metallic taste in my mouth was getting stronger, and I could feel the first signs of cellular damage beginning to manifest. "I can make it," I said. "Question is whether I'll be conscious when I get there. Then we better move fast." We entered the north tunnel, a straight shot toward the heart of the facility. The shaft was narrower here, forcing us back into the uncomfortable crawl. But it was also cleaner, with less accumulated radioactive dust. "Bodhi," Kora's voice was getting weaker. "I need to tell you something. Save your strength. No, listen. If we don't make it out of this, if the radiation gets us before we can complete the mission, I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of what you've become. Save it for the victory speech. I'm serious. You've always been the one who sees the bigger picture, who understands that sometimes you have to sacrifice everything to save what matters." I thought about the bigger picture, about the millions of people who would die if we failed, about the civilization that would collapse if the infrastructure attacks succeeded. "We're not sacrificing anything," I said. "We're investing in the future." That's one way to look at it. We reached another junction, this one directly below the server room. I could hear the hum of electronics above us, the sound of computers processing data and coordinating the attack on 17 different targets. "Access panel," I said, pointing to a removable grill in the ceiling. 10 feet up. Can you reach it?" I tried to stand, but the confined space made it impossible. I'll have to climb. On what? I looked around the junction, seeing pipe brackets and electrical conduits that might support my weight. Improvise. It took me 10 minutes to reach the access panel, 10 minutes of careful climbing, while my motor control deteriorated and my vision blurred. But I made it, and I managed to remove the grill without triggering any alarms. The server room was directly above us, a maze of computer equipment and communication devices. I could see the control node, a central server cluster that coordinated the timing and targeting of the shaped charges. "I'm in," I whispered. "What do you see?" "The control node, about 20 feet away, behind a cluster of servers." "Guards?" "No guards. They're all focused on the perimeter." I pulled myself up into the server room, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The radiation levels were lower here, but the damage was already done. I had maybe 30 minutes before I lost consciousness, maybe an hour before the cellular damage became irreversible. But 30 minutes was enough. I reached the control node, a sophisticated piece of equipment that managed the timing and coordination of the entire attack. It was protected by multiple layers of security, biometric scanners, encryption protocols, fail-safe mechanisms. But it was also connected to the facility's main computer network, and that network was powered by the same backup batteries that powered the emergency lighting. Ember was right, I said to myself. They chose communications over security. The control node security systems were running on reduced power, operating in emergency mode. The biometric scanners were offline, the encryption protocols were using simplified algorithms, and the fail-safe mechanisms were disabled to conserve battery life. I connected my portable computer to the control node's network interface and began the intrusion process. It was easier than I'd expected. The emergency protocols had weakened the security systems to the point where a skilled engineer could bypass them. But I wasn't just bypassing them, I was rewriting them. Instead of simply disabling the control node, I was reprogramming it. Instead of stopping the attack, I was redirecting it. The shaped charges would still detonate, but they would detonate in empty fields and abandoned buildings instead of critical infrastructure. "Bodhi," Kora's voice came from below. "How's it going?" "Almost done. 5 more minutes." "You don't have 5 more minutes. Jake and Ember are at the blast doors, but they're having trouble with the override codes. Security is responding to their position." "How long do I have?" "Maybe 2 minutes before they break through the doors. Maybe 3. I looked at the control node's display, saw the progress bar slowly creeping toward completion. The reprogramming was 60% complete, but the remaining 40% would take at least 4 minutes. "It's not going to work," I said. "I need more time." "Then buy yourself more time." I thought about the options, about the resources available in the server room. Emergency shutdown protocols, fire suppression systems, backup power management. "The fire suppression system," I said. "If I trigger it, it'll flood the room with halon gas. That'll force them to evacuate long enough for me to finish the reprogramming." "Won't that kill you too?" "Not if I hold my breath." "For 4 minutes?" "For as long as it takes." I found the fire suppression controls, a manual override system designed to flood the server room with inert gas in case of electrical fire. It would displace all the oxygen in the room, making it uninhabitable for anyone without breathing apparatus. But it would also protect the computer equipment from damage, allowing me to complete the reprogramming even as I suffocated. "Bodhi, don't. Tell Jake and Ember to fall back. Give me 10 minutes, then come back for the control node." "I'm not leaving you." "You're not leaving me. You're ensuring the mission succeeds." I triggered the fire suppression system, and immediately the room began to fill with invisible gas. The oxygen levels dropped rapidly, and I could feel the first effects of hypoxia beginning to manifest. But the reprogramming continued, the progress bar creeping slowly toward completion. 70%, 75, 80. My vision began to tunnel, and I could feel my motor control deteriorating even further. But my fingers kept moving across the keyboard, muscle memory guiding them even as my conscious mind began to fade. 85%, 90, 95. I could hear footsteps in the corridor outside, voices shouting instructions. The security team had reached the server room, but they couldn't enter while the halon gas was active. 98%, 99. My consciousness began to slip away, darkness creeping in from the edges of my vision. But I held on, forcing myself to stay awake just long enough to see the final confirmation. 100%. Reprogramming complete. The shaped charges were still armed, still counting down to detonation. But now they would detonate harmlessly, their destructive power wasted on empty ground instead of critical infrastructure. I collapsed beside the control node, my body finally succumbing to the combined effects of radiation poisoning and oxygen deprivation. But I was smiling because I knew we'd won. The secondary phase would fail. The infrastructure would survive. The country would have time to recover, to rebuild, to prepare for whatever came next. As consciousness faded, I heard the sound of the server room door opening, heard voices calling my name. But it was too late for rescue and too late for regret. The mission was complete. The world was safe. And that was enough. The halon gas dissipated with mechanical precision, leaving the server room in sterile silence broken only by the soft hum of cooling fans. My lungs burned like I'd swallowed molten copper, each breath a conscious victory against suffocation. The control node's display pulsed green, reprogramming complete, targeting redirected, mission accomplished. But death was still collecting its dues. Bodhi! Kora's voice cut through the chemical haze as she dragged herself through the access panel. Broken blood vessels had turned her eyes into roadmaps of red, and her hands trembled with radiation-induced tremors. The gas, how long were you unconscious? Long enough. I tasted halon residue and copper pennies, my voice a rusted whisper. Status report? Jake and Ember breached the blast doors. They're securing the facility. She helped me sit up, her grip surprisingly strong despite the cellular damage. The security team surrendered when they realized their coordination network was dead. Through the server room's reinforced windows, dawn light cast long shadows across the compound. Military vehicles converged like metallic vultures, hazmat teams, medical specialists, investigators who would spend months documenting the conspiracy's scope. The shaped charges? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the control node's telemetry. Detonated precisely on schedule. 17 simultaneous explosions in empty wilderness, exactly as you programmed. Kora's smile was grim satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. Some very surprised deer, but zero infrastructure damage. I leveraged myself upright using the control node's housing, my legs unsteady as damaged nerves misfired. The radiation sickness was accelerating. I could feel my cellular structure unraveling in real time. But we'd bought the country time to cauterize the remaining infection. Ember? I asked. Alive but barely. She's in the medical bay, giving intelligence briefings between blood transfusions. And Damien? Kora's expression went stone cold. Damien took a rifle round to the chest during the blast door breach. He stayed conscious long enough to ensure the override codes worked, then bled out in the security checkpoint. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of necessary sacrifice. Damien had calculated the odds, had chosen duty over survival. His death had purchased millions of lives. The other targets? I asked. Eliminated. Once we severed the coordination network, the FBI tracked the communication patterns and rolled up the remaining cells. 17 simultaneous raids, all successful. Through the server room's emergency lighting, I watched the facility's main display, showing global communication networks regenerating like digital tissue. Satellite links re-establishing, internet backbones reconnecting, the electronic nervous system of civilization slowly healing itself. How long do we have? I asked, though cellular damage was already providing the answer. The medical team estimates 48 hours before organ failure becomes irreversible. Maybe less, given our exposure levels during the tunnel crawl. I thought about 48 hours, about intelligence debriefings and system hardening recommendations. Enough time to ensure our sacrifice purchased permanent security improvements. Jake. Still functional somehow. The man's got the constitution of a bunker. He's coordinating with response teams despite radiation levels that should have dropped him hours ago. I stared at the control node's success confirmation one final time, at the screens displaying mission completion statistics. The secondary phase had been neutralized, the infrastructure attacks had failed, and the conspiracy had been exposed. But victory felt hollow, weighted down by the radiation slowly killing us all. Kora, I said quietly, I need you to promise me something. Stop. Promise me you'll make sure they understand what happened here. That this wasn't just about stopping 17 explosions, it was about preserving the foundation of everything we've built. I promise. And promise me you'll make sure they strengthen the systems. Fix the vulnerabilities that made this possible. I promise, Bodhi. I nodded, satisfied. The mission was complete, but the work would continue. Other engineers would analyze our discoveries. Other security specialists would close the gaps we'd identified. The country would be stronger because of what we'd learned through our dying. The server room door opened with a mechanical hiss, and Jake entered with 2 military medics wearing full radiation suits. His face was corpse pale, his movements unsteady, but his eyes retained tactical focus. "Transport's ready," he said. "Medical facility is standing by with experimental treatment protocols." "Prognosis?" I asked. "Experimental. Promising, but no guarantees." He met my eyes. "The important thing is we stopped them. All of them." Through the facility's main display, I could see global communication networks stabilizing. Internet traffic resuming normal patterns, satellite communications functioning properly, the digital infrastructure of modern civilization intact and operational. "The EMP effects?" I asked. "Temporary by design. Most systems are coming back online now that the interference has cleared." Jake's smile was exhausted but genuine. "Turns out the pulse was designed to disable, not destroy. They needed the infrastructure intact for the secondary phase. Which means recovery will be faster than expected. Much faster. Within 36 hours, most systems will be fully operational." I thought about the implications, about the resilience of the networks we'd fought to protect. The conspiracy had been sophisticated, but it had also been conservative, designed to capture rather than annihilate. "The intelligence?" I asked. Ember's debriefing is providing details on the entire network. Foreign coordination, domestic assets, funding sources, technical capabilities. Jake paused. "It's going to take months to fully unravel, but we've got the key threads." "And the other potential targets?" "Secured. Once we understood the attack pattern, protective measures were implemented at all critical facilities." I looked around the server room one final time, at the equipment we'd fought to protect, and the systems we'd used to turn the enemy's weapons against themselves. The victory was complete, but the cost was still accumulating in our dying cells. "Time to go," I said. The medical evacuation was a blur of stretchers and 4 lines, radiation suits and contamination protocols. As we were loaded into the transport, I watched the facility shrink behind us, its emergency lighting giving way to normal operations as the crisis passed into history. "Bodhi," Kora said, gripping my hand as the medical team inserted for lines. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected. "All of us. Even Damien. Damien would be proud. Damien would be planning the next mission." The transport lifted off, carrying us toward medical treatment and uncertain futures. Through the windows, I could see the sun rising over a country that would wake up to functional power grids and working communications networks. A country that would never know how close it had come to digital annihilation. 17 explosions had occurred exactly on schedule, their destructive power wasted on empty wilderness. The conspiracy had been exposed, the cells neutralized, the infrastructure preserved. But the victory had come at a cost that would continue extracting itself for decades to come. Damien was gone, Ember was dying, and the rest of us were living on borrowed time measured in hours rather than years. "Was it worth it?" Kora asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the transport's engines. I thought about the question, about the millions of lives that would continue because of our actions, about the civilization that would endure, the children who would grow up in a world where the lights stayed on and the networks remained connected. "Ask me in 48 hours, I said, but I already knew the answer. The mission was complete, the world was safe, and that was enough. It had always been enough. The transport banked toward the medical facility, carrying us toward treatment and whatever time remained. Behind us, the facility's communications arrays rotated back to operational positions, ready to serve the networks we'd died to protect. The sun rose higher, illuminating a world that would never know how close it had come to digital darkness. And in that ignorance, I found a kind of peace that radiation couldn't touch. The mission was complete. The world was safe. And that was enough. The transport's engines hummed steadily, carrying us toward whatever time remained. In the distance, communication towers blinked their steady patterns, and somewhere in server rooms across the country, displays showed green status lights and stable network connections. The world turned, the lights stayed on, and civilization endured. That was always the point. Mission status complete. Infrastructure damage 0. Coordination network eliminated. Recovery time 36 hours. Cost acceptable. The digital heart of civilization continues to beat. The price was paid in full.